right. Hi, guys. How's it going? Oh my gosh. Hi, Maggie. Love it.
Hello.
We'll definitely give people a minute to start trickling in and then we can get started. But everyone, we are here with Emily Hashimoto. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give an introduction to her and then we're going to get into some questions. So, Emily Hashimoto's debut novel, A World Between, follows two queer women of color over the course of 13 years as they grow away and towards each other. The Oprah magazine said it was a sweetly poignant look at the transformative power of young love, and Kirkus Review called it a sweeping debut novel about ever-changing nature of identity and love. Her personal essays have appeared in Out, Electric Literature, Catapult, Literary Hub, The Rumpus, centering intersectional narratives. She lives in Southern California with her wife and child. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
Yeah. So congratulations on your debut. I'd love to hear about how the publishing experience has been for you. And I know you've published specifically with Feminist Press, which is a nonprofit. And I'd
Yeah,
love to hear about your experience with them specifically and how that differs from traditional publishing.
absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, I think there was a long period of working with my agent, sending the book out to a lot of different places. And I think the response was kind, but I think it was people maybe who didn't understand the book, like if I'm being honest. But Feminist Press, I heard back with a lot of excitement from my who became my editor, Jisoo Kim, saying like, I have a friend who dropped out of med school. For those of you who read the book, like I have a friend who dropped out of med school, who went into public health, who is Indian American, and she was like, I know these characters, I know these people, I get it. And that's very flattering, but also I think just like I think it was that sort of was indicative of the rest of the experience. I think Feminist Press, I think that in terms of your question about sort of was it in terms of being different from the traditional process, I think they're a small team for sure, but I got a lot of support, and I'm still getting that support. Like my book was at their AWP booth, and I think just I'm like I continue to be embraced by that team, and so it's kind of an amazing thing. I feel really lucky to have published with them, and I've heard some things, I've read some things about kind of other people's experiences, in kind of publishing while queer, publishing while being POC, and nobody asked me to like italicize any Japanese or Gujarati in the book. Nobody was like, oh, I don't know, we can't like really say that. I wasn't asked to make any of those kinds of changes, so I was able to say, I think, super authentic, to what I wanted to say.
I love that. That's such an incredible experience to be for your first novel. And I'm curious about what you said about the italicizing of um the two languages. Is that because just they're a foreign language, or what would the common practice with italicization be there?
Yeah, I think typically, and I was kind of bummed recently. I saw it in kind of like a recently published book, but I think that that sort of maybe is sometimes, and definitely was, a practice of italicizing non-English languages. But it's this way, right, that like right on the page, it sets apart
Yeah.
whatever someone is saying, and it's like, well, this like literally like this is the other immediately, which
Yeah.
is such a like I guess I understand it, and it's also just like a logistic thing. It's like maybe not a big deal, but it kind of is a big deal. So I think in my book I was very proud. There's a moment where like I can't actually, if I'm honest, I can't remember where it is, but I had something in Japanese, and then actually the English was italicized, and sort of only to add emphasis. But for me, it was like kind of like a cool turnabout thing. So to have it be sort of like, a little bit different. But anyway, I mean, I think it fit with the text, but it was just kind of like a nice,
Yeah, because
a nice
instead of
thing.
othering the Japanese, you're othering the English in
Yeah.
that sentence. You're saying that the norm is the Japanese rather than the English.
In that moment, yeah, definitely.
Love that. So as I got into the book, I found the characters' anxieties and fears, on one hand, deeply frustrating, but relatable at the same time. I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in Boston. So like that was a very like personal experience for me hearing, I feel like they went to like BU or Northeastern. Like you never like explicitly said, but I was like Commonwealth Avenue, like trying to find the
Yeah.
clues. Um, but yeah, I oscillated between like loving them and loathing them and like wanting them to do the things that I knew that deep down they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But that for me is just an indication of how achingly honest this book was. And it made me reflect on the own ways that, you know, I still do, but especially in the past while I was in college, avoided setting boundaries or telling hard truths due to internalized homophobia or just like general plain immaturity. So I'd love to know more about your character development process and, you know, some of the inspiration behind this book. Like what made you want to write their story specifically?
I'll start with that last question first. I mean, I think for me, I wanted to write about, I actually had this whole other idea that I was going to write about. It was going to be about a couple who'd been together for 10 years and broke up, and sort of what was like the fallout of that kind of moment. And then I realized I didn't want to write about that. It made me sad. I didn't want to do it. And instead, I think I really wanted to just tell like a joyful story. And I think I still love it, although it's like maybe problematic. It is problematic, but I love When Harry Met Sally. I love that sort of like telling a love story over time and like, like the change of relationship, but I think obviously when I watched that movie, I understand it because so much of media is sort of like straight white people, but it didn't like resonate for like what I understood about my life or about my friends' lives. And so I think that's kind of what I wanted to do, was create something where it was sort of, I love the framework, but to kind of queer it, make it Asian, which is what I did. And I think it just, yeah, so I think that was really it, was just, and I think to immerse myself in a really fun world. And even so at this, like in the writing of it, at that point I was already married and like we were already thinking about having a kids. I was in a super different stage of my life, and so it was so fun to just step back and not be there, but be able to reflect on it. And certainly though, I mean, there is my wife would want me to say, this isn't based in real life. I mean, I will tell the truth that the way that they meet and their first date in the dining hall, the date, that is how my wife and I met. So just, I will say that we did meet at a lecture about why not to pursue same sex marriage. I can tell what we were saying, but like, because we have other things to do as a queer community. So that was when we met, which I think is just like, will always be funny to me that that's when we met. But then it really departs from there. But that first date is kind of put under ice. Oh gosh, but yeah, to talk about the character development, I think I think it was a slow development. I think really at first it was just kind of like ideas and words on the page. And I think it of course became something more, it became what it is. But I think as I slowly sort of started to do that character development and as they became sort of really distinct people, I like the idea that they have some overlap, but not really a lot, right? I think, Eleanor is much more like, and even in just the writing, even like not in the dialogue, but in the prose writing, Eleanor like goes on and on these long sentences. She won't shut up. And she always, but like a lot of the time does say a lot or the wrong thing, but just, like her mouth is open and she is talking. Where Lena, of course, is like really reserved, like, and that I think is like because of the shape of her life, right? I think sort of like there's so many things that she can't say to her family or or even to that other side of her life, to sort of like the queer people that she knows. I think there's such distinct worlds. So I think when you're used to keeping things really separate, then I think you are tight-lipped because you're like, I'm talking to these people, I'm talking to these people. So I think there's just kind of like, it's, you are your own PR disaster. I think that's really who she is. So I think that's kind of what developed. But yeah, I mean, the anxieties and that sort of like undercurrent of like, what am I doing? And I mean, truthfully at 37, I still feel that way a lot of the time, but I think it's a different feeling, like in college, when you graduate from college right away, because I think it's true that you feel ready to like, I'm going to take on the fucking world and I'm going to be amazing. And then I don't know that people are like ready to receive a 21-year-old who's like, sure, I can do anything. But I think like, I think there's a mismatch of what the world wants of you. And so I think is so much about that sort of like that tension, that conflict of like what you want, and also sometimes not even knowing what you want. And I think that's the other thing too, is people sort of trying to really sort a lot out, and they're not quite there.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to there is such a popular genre for young women, young queer people in year two of a pandemic, where so many of us, thankfully not myself, I'm really lucky that I graduated in 2019 and not
Mm,
2020, but graduating into a pandemic and
yeah.
being like, well, what the fuck do I do now? Like I thought I was going to be ready to take on the world, and the world is just like pushing me back. And I think this genre with like Sally Rooney and Otessa Moshfegh and Luster by Raven Lalani, it's, exploded in the last year from a social media perspective, from a sales perspective. And when I was introduced to A World Between, it was sold to me as normal people, but make it queer and make it not white. And I'd love to hear about how you see your book fitting into this like more popular genre and being, likened to books within that genre, like Normal People.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's such an honor, to kind of see that. And actually, recently, Autostraddle included A World Between on their. I forget what they called the article, but it was something about like like our list of like chaotic queers or something like that. And I was like, what a freaking honor. And I mean, there were some really beautiful books on that list. Like I just recently finished You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, and I thought that was like an awesome book. And I sort of saw. I wrote Zaina a fan letter, which I don't always do, but I was like, it was just such a great read, and I think I appreciate so much the books like that are coming out. And I guess that's it. It's like, the ability for, I think about even like Alina, right, who is sort of like, you know, there's such a rich inner world that she has, but she keeps it. It's like it's in there, right? It's not really coming out. It's like this, and I think even there is chaos in that, so the ability to show somebody who is like, well, like a little more type A, but that there is a chaos there, or that there's like a chaos in not making decisions, which I think is kind of what happens to her. But that she gets that, right? Because I think a lot of times when we think about sort of how, for example, how Indian American women are depicted, like it isn't like that, right? I think it's like they don't get to be like a mess, such a mess, or like even in Eleanor, I think is, yeah, like kind of like loud and mouthy. And I think about the ways that Asian women are often depicted, and it's not as mouthy. But I mean, of course, that it's changing, and I think that's really exciting. So that's where I feel really excited to be a part of that, that little bit of a shift.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So another question that I have kind of relating to what you say, Lena's inner world and lack of decision making is part of like the driving force behind the plot of this book and the relationship between Lena and Eleanor. So I'd love to hear about why you made Lena and Dov such a central conflict in this book. Because she seems to be, up until the end, the decision maker between her and Eleanor.
Mhm.
And her lack of decision is also, a decision in itself.
Yeah, I think what I think, I'm trying to remember like when he came on the scene when I started writing. I can't remember at this point. I think the most important thing to me, though, which I realized early on, I feel like maybe there were, we take character, right? There's always this kind of world. I'm editing my like first draft of my second book now, and I think there's this thing where you can, I appreciate the applause, and I think you like when you're like you can kind of like make them a little more this, a little bit less that, you know what I mean? You can just kind of like modulate it a little bit. And, I think I found that with him, where like at some points he was like kind of douchey. And I realized like I didn't want that. And because I wanted to give it a fair shot. And I'll say this, like I have definitely heard some feedback from folks that say, they're like Lena is bisexual, and the way it gets treated in the book is weird. And I'll just say this, like I think I really don't, I'm not sure how Lena identifies, it's maybe like the queer place, you know what I mean? But like her love for him is real.
Mhm.
But she loved him. And I think also, our lives are not linear, right? Like the way like who we fall in love with is never linear. And so I think I want to just like give space to that. And I think that was another thing too, was like that I think, Lena being so analytical, she did the math on her life. And, I mean, it's not in the book, but I think what happens is like she goes back and is, with her ex again, of course. That's never happened before. But so that happens. And I think that there are some other women and it just doesn't work. And then I think there's something about Deval that just kind of like works for her in that moment when she's like, but the math she does is wrong. I think the math she does is like, well, women are terrible for me. And let me like, is there who else is out there? And I think that's how he kind of ends up in the mix. I think had she not met him, who knows what would have happened. But I wanted it to feel real, that she sort of like fell in love with this person, liked him, loved him. Again, the math added up for her. But I think ultimately, like, I don't think, even if I don't think I've ever said this before, but I think even if she didn't, even if she hadn't reconnected with Eleanor, I don't think they would have gotten married. I know she seems to think that. I don't think it would happen though, because I think really like, ultimately, I think there's just like a mismatch, because I think they kind of want different things. I think there's so much more that Lena wants, right? And that's sort of the last part of the book, is her sort of like continuing to explore, these other passions and these other things. And I think that's the things, like when we see her in 2010, she is like, she's disappointed in her life, but she's like settling in a lot of ways, right? But I think then all of a sudden at the end of it, it's like there's this kind of like really open, there's these blue skies. I hope for her.
Yeah, I hope for her too. I think I'm like formulating a new question after what you just said. I think with Lena and Dov, what I saw in their relationship is, yeah, genuine like love and respect for one another. But Lena was always keeping intimacy, emotional and physical, like at an arm's length with him. I remember like when she was visiting him in San Francisco and they were getting into this fight, she just like completely shut down and like would refuse to speak. Um, and do you think that her wanting to wait to have sex until marriage was a way for her to not fully let herself be in that relationship? Like, how did you see that choice for her?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I think sort of like the big umbrella answer is yes. But I also think too, I had someone tell me at some point that they said like even the straight sex scenes are gay. Like I don't, yeah, I guess they were. They
Yeah.
were. So I guess that's the other thing, is I think like Lena has sex. I guess it's like Lena has sex with Deval like she has sex with women, kind of.
Yeah.
Sort of. And so I think too, it's like what is sex? I think this idea of like, I'm saving this for marriage, I think is this idea of like, maybe, I don't know, maybe some of that is her buying into like some ideas, of what things should look like. And I think some of it too is keeping him at bay for sure. I think as much as she can, distance, like, yes, again, because again, I don't think that they're like a total match. But at the same time, right, I feel like Eleanor and Lena like would love to like devour, in some points, would love to like devour each other, and I think like that sort of passion and feeling is just not something she has for him. So I think in that way, like, the way in which Eleanor gets into Lena, because she's been at times her best friend or her girlfriend or whatever they've been, like, she just knows her so well. So it's like she can like fit into all the like crevices and spots where like Deval could never get all
Yeah.
the way in.
Damn, that's so gay. um so okay, you chose to write this novel from both a third person POV and also with massive time jumps in between, these time periods. It was starting with them in college and then like a decade later and then I think 7 years later after that. um I'd love to know why you made that choice to have these like massive time jumps specifically, because I would find myself with Eleanor, you would, in the beginning, you only got her perspective. You didn't get Lena's perspective while they were in college. And I was so eager to know what she was thinking during all of those times. Um, so yeah, why'd you do that? Why'd you make me wait like 10 years to understand Lena's point of view?
Oh, that's such a good question. Hey, so can you hear me okay? I just switched to headphones. Is this okay? All right. There's like something happening outside. So why did I make you in a
Me
specifically way?
specifically. Yeah, it was a personal offense.
Gosh, that is such a good question. I mean, I think originally, actually, I kind of conceived of this a lot of different ways. I think if you, there would be some terrible writing probably on my Google Drive of, like a lot of this from Lena's perspective, not a lot, but some of it from Lena's perspective, or, Eleanor in different sections. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I was going to sort of start from Lena's perspective. I think at one point, kind of in 2004 to get Lena, and maybe not even Eleanor, or maybe sort of the whole thing was Lena. I feel like, again, there's so many different iterations of this. But I think starting with Eleanor in 2004 works well because she is the one who will sort of like tell you everything. I think honestly, when we're in Lena's POV in 2010 and 2017, there's like things she's not telling us.
Yeah.
Even when we're in her POV, like, because there are things that she doesn't understand herself.
Right.
Like you may remember, again, the sort of like very queer things, like, come on, Lena, but like the way she's noticing Eleanor, the way she's viewing the world, like, there is a queerness to her, even when she's in love with her fiance, and I think, yeah, so anyway, so just to say, I think like starting with Eleanor is such a nice, I think like a nice kind of like big open, you're going to hear it all kind of introduction to their world, although in that way, I think, for some people I've heard feedback, I'm curious if any of you feel this way, but like that, it is kind of a lot, like Eleanor is kind of a lot, lots of thoughts and opinions, lots of big ideas. It's like it's a little, but again, to me, it felt like the best kind of introduction to who they are together.
I think this was one of the questions that we posed in our Geneva chat, which is the platform that we host
Mhm.
Sapph-Lit on. I related most to Eleanor. I was a gender and sexuality studies major.
Yeah.
I was that outspoken, like cunty on purpose, like bitch who, had an opinion about everything and was not shy to share it. And then like her in college was me in college. And I read that and I was like, I fucking hate her, but I adore her at the same time because that was me. And I understood exactly where she's coming from. And that's why I loved, really getting into their heads. That was one of the things that I loved most about your prose was like, oh, I know what they're thinking. And it's really interesting for you to say that, like, because Lena is so closed off from herself, we, as the reader, don't understand everything she's thinking at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Eleanor is a lot, but I adore her for it because being a lot is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I so appreciate that resonated for you, and it sort of makes sense because I think people who did sort of like, I mean, to me there are some like there's like it was like a real checklist: women's center, vagina monologues, yeah, like women's studies. I think that to me there were certain things, but I think if you didn't know about any of that stuff, then maybe you're like, what is this book? So I think as long as sort of the touch points are familiar, you're like, okay, I totally get it. And Maggie, I'm reading this comment that you love that she was a lot. And yeah, it's true. I think it is the age, right? I think, by the end of it, I mean, Eleanor is such a different person. They're
Yeah.
both different, but Eleanor is so different. And I think like mellowing with age and figuring out her shit, like she's like working and trying to figure out like, what do I want? But it's not in this frenetic scrambled way like it was earlier. I think she's like, I'm in this program, I know what I need, I'm living with my parents, but working it out finally.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speaks to both Eleanor and Lena's journeys of coming out and how it has them present themselves to the world, where Eleanor had like so excited to be in the queer space and like super, super messy, like a lot all of the time. And then like started to kind of mellow out and like
Yeah.
she knew who she was and her identity and she was confident in it. And which is why I think the ending ended the way it did, but we will talk about that.
Okay.
And then with Lena, I mean, I feel like she's kind of an example that a coming out is like a second puberty in a way,
Mm.
where when let people know who you really are, you are reorienting yourself in the world in a different way. Because queerness is just so much more than who you sleep with, who you fall in love with. It's, a way of being. which is something that as a bisexual woman myself who, dates men sometimes, if I can help it, that like, it's something that I have to remind myself that like, I'm still gay and this is how I orient myself in the world. Um, Sorry for the tangent, but I just adored this book, so clearly. Okay, so we're gonna get into the ending.
Okay.
So I personally love like endings that are wrapped up in a bow, and this was very much not that, which like great, we love it. I want to know what happens next, and I understand if you don't know, but like what do you hope happens? Like do they find their way back to each other? Like what's next for them in your mind? Could you like give us a little insider info?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I will say kind of originally there was a running through the airport scene.
Oh,
There was. I forget who was chasing who, but that was the idea that just there's like sweeping and like somebody's getting on a plane to California and but that was not like fully realized because I think ultimately, right, once I'd really written the whole book and thought about who they were, it just didn't feel the same, because I also think too, I think I've referred to this book as a feminist love story. And I think for me, what that means is that I leave them on firm ground, like like fulfilled in and of themselves, not in relation to each other. And so I think that just, I guess, felt more honest. And I think because ultimately, again, sort of like the running through the airport was written very early before the kind of really sort of like the rest of the book took shape. And so I think it's really about, I don't know, like I feel even talking about it now, I just feel so proud of both of them, of where they ended up. That sort of that moment when Lena is like, when Lena, I mean, kind of starts the process of breaking up with Eleanor kind of at the end of part 3. I think, and then Eleanor's like, oh God, I got to figure out something else. And so I think Eleanor's at the beginning of that journey. And then we see her at the end of it, at the end, or sort of like in process at the end of the book, where she's going somewhere else. Well, literally and figuratively, and that she doesn't want to like, I don't know, she's like not attracted to the chaos like she once was. And I think Lena is that maybe kind of the beginning of that journey, but like she's like, I'm gonna, hopefully she's gonna like move out of her parents' house, and like maybe she's gonna like do something else and not, do kind of like the statistician work that she's been up to. So I think that's what I don't know. It feels good. I think where they end, what's printed feels really good. But I will say something that's been so interesting to me through this process is when people talk to me about the ending, everybody seems to have a different idea of what they think is going to happen. So I remember like a first conversation with my agent, and he said like, well, it's going to be amazing. And then they're going to, he's like, I can totally see it. Going to see each other in another couple months, and then they're going to get together. And I've had people say like, it's so great, like that's it for them. They had a good ride. I think at my most cynical, I think the truth, I hate to say it, but I think the truth is like they're just going to keep bumping into each other, and it's going to keep not working. I hate
yeah.
to say it, but I think the truth, even though they're having this personal growth, and I think that does help. But I don't know. I also think that sometimes you just have like a sore spot for that person. I married my college sweetheart, so this is just me hearing about other people. But like, I understand it to
Like
be
I
true.
can't relate. I have it good.
It's interesting. Yeah. We've been together 17 years. And it's funny to think about this book and then the next book of mine, which is like, it just, very different to sort of like, my wife is like my best friend. We're still in love. We have like a 3-year-old. It's kind of, life is complicated. But I think it feels so different. Yeah, it feels so set apart though. But anyway, I think probably there is just some amount of chaos for the two of them that will continue. I think that's what's true. But really I think because of the end is as it is, I think really like it is truly, I mean, it sounds a bit corny, but I think it's true. Like it really is up to interpretation. And I think it's based on whatever your philosophy of love is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that answer. And I want to share a chat question and read it out loud so the recording has it as well. Jessica said, I think it was super interesting how you chose different perspectives for different stages in their lives. Lena's noticing of Eleanor felt super real to me as someone who has had that weird relationship of friends more than friends. Like when she jump out of a conversation to say how Eleanor smiled, yearning without acknowledging it is super queer.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I think about that a lot in my writing when I'm writing about queer women and queer people. I think because there is this thing, right? Like you can extremely easily have like a queer woman friend who is just your friend. But I also think it's that thing sometimes when you maybe when you meet somebody where you're like, oh, I'm so into you, but like because I want to just spend all my time with you and hang out and go hiking, or is it that like I want to be with you, you know? And so sometimes it's hard to tell. And so I think maybe for Lena, she's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Well, for with Lena, I feel like first of all, she's like, I don't really want to deal with this, so I'm not going to deal with it, but I'm going to notice things still. And it's also maybe, but I think, and at one point I think it's in the book, but just sort of like Lena, again, like we're working off the wrong data. She's like, why we're just best friends, period.
Just
Just
besties.
besties. Yeah.
And history said they were roommates. um, and they were roommates. Anyways, so you mentioned that you're writing something new, and of course, you
Mhm.
have to talk about it. But one of the questions from our community was, are there going to be any of the side characters that you revisit in your future work? Because their
Mhm.
college friends were super interesting. I thought Dav himself was honestly super interesting. You made him so likable. He's just like a little golden retriever boy. But yeah, is like there any inspiration from those side characters for future stories? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I mean, nothing sort of specific, although I kind of love the idea of like a Tomas book, because I think he's a super interesting story. And like, of course, some of his life, it sort of reflects back into the characters, of course, about family and what that means and sort of what you're looking for in life. Right. Because he has his own love drama. It's very much in the background, but he is, until the end, sort of unlucky in love. I think it's more maybe the ideas that I'm interested in exploring, So I think it's a very like gentle, it's very much in the background, but sort of, this thing about, when we meet Sam after he's transitioned, which again, I think felt just so real to me. I have a lot of friends like that. And I think I'm interested in that. So maybe that's like, I think kind of just the concept, if not Sam himself. And I don't know, and I think too, and again, maybe sort of like the idea of like not a sequel to this book, but the book I'm working on now is I think about sort of like that a little bit after this, a little after that stage of you know marriage and trying to it's still trying to figure your shit out, but maybe it kind of looks and feels really different stakes. And so I think the next book I'm working on, I sort of consider it like a spiritual sequel, if not a literal one.
Oh, excited. Well, you'll definitely have to come back to
I'd
Sapph-Lit
love to.
to chat about it because I love reading sequels. It's the nosiness inside me to be like, okay, what happens next?
Totally.
Okay, last
Totally.
of my questions before we move
Okay.
on to the rapid fire round. Is there a reaction or comment since publishing that has stood out to you from a reader that like you like keep going back to or remember specifically?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got an email from someone who I believe like they are Gujarati and queer and came out later in life. And I think they said something about like the book really making them feel seen and visible and sort of thinking about their life in a different way. And that was killer. And I think, I hope. Oh, I hoped for such things, but even I didn't even imagine sort of that kind of example of like really coming through for people. But I have heard a lot of that, Asian folks talking, folks coming through who are like, I am Chinese and Jewish, and this spoke to me in lots of different ways. And I don't know, like it just, yeah, I think those moments are incredible. Or also people like I have a friend. Her dad is an old white man and read it, which was I was like a little bracing myself. But he was like, I learn new things. And he's like, I liked it. And it was a very tame review, but I think like it's just not something I'd imagined. And I think the ability to do that, right? Because like if I'm honest, when I was working on the kind of like the marketing guide with the press publicist, talking about who you imagine the audience is. I mean, I imagined it was all of you. So thank you for reading it. I did not imagine like men in their 70s reading this book. But that's super cool. But that's cool too, because I think to be able to kind of like cross out is neat. But again, certainly not the focus. It was to sort of write for you all.
Yeah. I love that because my dad is pushing 70, and whenever he compliments me, it's like in those kind of like short, curt words, like "Good job." I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, high praise from old white men when it's like, that was
Right.
nice.
Right.
Um,
And just to be clear, definitely not like seeking that praise. That is not like that is not the top priority. Just like, oh, you know what? I guess in turn, I'm like, oh, that's nice.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're on the rapid fire round.
Okay.
What are you currently reading?
Oh gosh. What is that called? Melinda Lowe's new book, Last Night at Telegraph Club. Is that what it's called? I
Yes.
think I'm missing a word. Last night at the Telegraph Club.
The last night at the Telegraph
The
Club.
last.
There might be two thes in there. Yeah, I read that last year. I loved it. Yeah, very, very
It's
good.
so fun. Yeah.
What is a book that you recommend everyone read?
This is not rapid fire. I have just to think about it for a second. I'm just trying to think of something that I really loved that I think everyone should read. I mean, I was just talking about it before, but You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, I think is like such an interesting book. And again, talk about characters who are like, oh, I don't know about you, but really ultimately rooting for someone. And I think that's an amazing thing to be able to write.
Love it. Yeah, that's on my list. Okay, is there a book coming out soon that you're excited to read?
Oh gosh, I'd have to like check my lists. I can't know. I mean, in terms of rapid fire, I'd have to like go to my Goodreads list. So it
Totally,
would not be rapid fire. Yeah.
totally understand. Okay, if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Audre Lorde.
Love. Did you take up a unusual quarantine activity?
I would say I enhanced my cocktail making.
Say more. I'm
Mhm.
curious.
Like back, like pre 2020, I would make, if I can say, very good old fashions.
Mm,
But I think now the bar has grown, and I sometimes make like special syrups for cocktails. It's gotten like a little bit natural, but in a good way, mostly good way.
I made my own simple syrup for the first time this year so I could make
Nice,
espresso martinis, and that was like
nice.
peak bartender mode for me. I
That's
love.
awesome. That's awesome.
Okay, favorite class that you took at university?
Oh, it probably would have a different name today, but at the time it was Lesbians and Gay Men in Society. Can you imagine? That title does not hold up. Like that was like 2003. It needs to be updated. Yeah. But
So
I learned like so much about my own history, and just I learned a ton. It was great.
I love that. Your favorite sapphic movie?
Ooh. Saving Face, or the half, right? Half of it. I feel right. Is that right?
Yes, the
The
half
half
of
of it.
it.
The half.
And then last question, your favorite sapphic TV show, if you have one.
Well, I'm watching. Oh, okay. Favorite. Probably Killing Eve.
My mom told me to watch that last night, and I still haven't. It's on my list. I have a very long like TV show list. I just can't get to all
Okay.
of them. Okay, rapid fire over. On to community questions.
Awesome.
And for everyone on the call, if you have any questions for Emily, if we have time at the end, I will ask them so you can just pop them in the chat. Jessica says, yes, Killing Eve.
That's awesome.
I know I need to watch it. Everyone in Sapph-Lit yells at me to watch it, but one day. Okay, so this question comes from Vans. How were you introduced to Desi culture? Because the way you write it is so freaking accurate and also beautiful and respectful. This is coming from a Desi person.
That makes me feel so good, because I would say that was absolutely one of my publishing concerns. So how do I the Desi culture? So I grew up with a lot of Indian folks in my little New Jersey town, and so yeah, two of my childhood best friends are both Gujarati, and then I have like other Indian people in my life, and so I when I was because the other thing too, I think for me that felt really interesting is like, well, I didn't want to just write about like two white women, because again, like that sort of has been done in the past a little bit. And so I think I was interested in sort of making them from different backgrounds, but I think with this overlap, because, and they certainly have, I think kind of, being Asian, there is sort of an overlap in some ways. And so I was thinking about it, and I think just because I grew up like I was in the Indian Day parade when I was like 13 or something. I forget how old I was. And I think just kind of grew up with the people, the food, like going to temple sometimes, and like prayer ceremonies at people's houses. And so I think that is something that I have a background in, but was very careful. One of my old and good friends did it like a sort of like a sensitivity read for it, and gave me translations and helped me kind of think about a lot of it. And that's sort of was my entry point.
I love that. Can I ask where in New Jersey are you from? Because I'm in New Jersey right now.
Oh, it's a small town in Bergen County called Dumont.
My dad's from Englewood.
Oh,
Very
funny.
familiar
Okay.
with Bergen County.
Okay.
No, North New Jersey has like a massive Indian American
Yeah.
population. So like, yes, that makes total sense now that I know.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question is from Jesse. Eleanor and Lena's on and off relationship plays with the idea of soulmates and destiny. Even Lena, our beloved scientist, grapples with the idea of meant to be in regards to her relationships with Dov and Eleanor. What made you want to write this kind of faded, right person, wrong time kind of love story?
Well, I mean, it's like more tortured that way, so it's good, right? Now, I think like I don't know, because I think I've actually been thinking about this a lot as I do more writing, and I think about where conflict sometimes comes from. So for killing Eve, right? It's like, I don't know, stalking and killing people and things like that. And I don't know. That is not my destiny as a writer to sort of do that, like big deaths or lots of violence, or a lot of the conflict that we see written into the things that we like or don't like. I think for me, my conflict really comes from something more internal, comes from love and heartbreak, because to me, I think that is as sad as anything else, or that is as there's so much tension and conflict in that anyway. So I think for me, that to me is like, that's like the biggest stake, is like right person, wrong time. And also I think it's just so real. I mean, I think, again, even with a college sweetheart, I think, there, I don't know, I think that just exists for so many people. I think that's something that a lot of people have endured and hopefully come out of those moments.
So kind of similar to the first question about how you integrated Desi culture into the book, Ori asks, I'm Nigerian and was wondering if you had seen any Nigerian weddings based on the description of Tomas and Kemi's wedding.
I did a lot of research. Gosh, I'm trying to remember now where it came from, but so okay. One thing about the book is that not everyone, but a lot of people are immigrants or people of color. And I think for me, I was so interested in everyone's different trajectories into the United States, and it looked really different for everyone. So some people, Eleanor has like, many generations on one side, one or two on the other. Of course, Lena's family, Tomas, Sam's family. So I think that to me, so when I was thinking about like, okay, if it's at a wedding, who's it going to, and I think thinking about that, and yet so just because also I think it just, I don't know, it looks different, I think. Also, if I had to really think about it, okay, so again, have I seen, to answer that question, no, I have not had the pleasure of being to a Nigerian wedding, but I think just like doing a lot of research into it. And I also think too, I think maybe I had read Americana not long before, so I think I was thinking a lot about Nigerian culture if I had to guess where that came from.
Yeah. Okay, so Shelby, who is on the call today, asks, which character are you most like, Eleanor or Lena?
So I think what I really did though was I gave them both traits of myself. Like Eleanor, I was a women and gender studies major. And what else about her? And I think, and again, yeah, like I think, in college and in my early 20s, I think this kind of like this frustrated idealism and like without a place to put it. I think I had some of that, but she is way more external than I will ever be. I can aspire to be that way, but I'm not. And then I think kind of like the, maybe like the more kind of reserved side of Lena, I think maybe some of that is true perhaps to who I am. But I think like how reserved she is, I think is a little different. And I think kind of the analytical side of her is something that I had to borrow that from elsewhere. But I think that's really what I did. I sort of like bifurcated myself and gave them a little bit of everything.
Love that. It's always so interesting to hear how authors put themselves into their characters. So it's cool to know that like they have a bit of both.
A bit of both, yeah.
Okay, so Libby asks, when did you first read about the lesbian continuum and what did you think made it stand out to you? Is there any other theory that's helped you understand female queerness?
Oh, this is such a good question. So I read about it in college. I read Audrey and Rich in college, and it just always stuck with me. And I remember kind of like talking to anybody about again, lesbian. It feels to me like so limited, but at that time, of course, that's what Audrey and Rich used. So it just felt like such a simple way, and even today, I think feels like a great way to sort of explain how we relate to each other. Right, this thing I was talking about before, that you're sort of like, do I want to be your friend? Do I want to be your wife? Like, what is this feeling I'm feeling? And I think the lesbian continuum helps explain that, where maybe it's not about which one, or it's not about one role at any given time. It might even be, kind of multiple touch points at any given time, or like Lena and Eleanor, different touch points depending on the year. So I think for me, it helps explain sort of how people relate to each other. It's funny now that I'm talking about this, the limits of language, right? Sort of, I was going to say the way women relate to each other, but I think it's not as simple as that. I think it could be sort of like queer people. I don't know. It's interesting to think about it, but yeah, I think that's sort of it's funny to think that informed a fiction book, a love story, like this feminist text. And then in terms of others, that's such a good question. I mean, yeah, I would say kind of like, I think I embarrassingly for a writer, I don't have many books on our bookshelf. We moved last year, so we really kind of downsized. I'm sure it'll grow, but one of the few books that I have is Sister Outsider, and I think a lot about that book too. I think there is some stuff in there about yeah, again, how we relate to each other.
Yeah. Sister Outsider was the second book that we read as
Oh,
it was our first nonfiction book. So we did a Casey McQuiston book for like our very first one. And then the next month we read Sister Outsider and Priory of the Orange Tree. And Sister
awesome.
Outsider was, I read it in college because gender and sexuality studies major, it's like
Yeah,
required text.
yeah,
But rereading it with like a community was really, really
it's really
enlightening.
cool.
And I think what you're saying really speaks to something that I get frustrated as a queer person, where that, friendship is seen as just not a romantic relationship. And there's so much more, like, there is romance in friendships, and there is, like, I think that our society doesn't place as much importance on friendships as it does romantic relationships. And like my best friend who's here with me with my parents who treat her like a second daughter, I call her my platonic life partner, and everyone thinks that we're fucking, and we're like, you know what, let's let them think that. But it's like this kind of assumption that like, oh, two gay people, they're gonna like, that's the romantic relationship. And like, if you look at us, yeah, we look like we're in a relationship, but we're really just like deeply intertwined friends whose lives are intertwined. And I think that, Adrienne Rich and that idea of queerness opening up what a relationship can look like in so many different ways,
Yeah,
we love. Anyways, tangent over.
that's
Jenny
awesome.
has a question in the chat, and then I think I have a few more. But I wanted to make sure we got to Jenny's. How did you decide which years to set the story parts of the story in? And this also kind of relates to Allie's question. For the times in between the time jumps, did you ever write out or plot those time gaps that we don't see?
Mhm.
And did you ever consider including another time period but got edited out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think like I guess my lack of creativity sets 2004, because I was in college in 2004, and I think it's this moment I remember. Well, again, little backstory. So on our true first date, my wife and I remember this was after the election, when Bush was reelected, and which felt like a downer time. But so I had done like a cool thing. I went and canvassed in Florida, which was really cool, and my wife had been to Pennsylvania, and so that was like one of the first things we talked about. And I remember feeling really like, oh my God, we're both like doing things. This is so cool. But anyway, so I think that moment for me felt really that fall of 2004, because I think there's this time of like it's when you're in college, like maybe I guess when you're in college, and if there's a presidential election, and I guess that kind of feeling you're like the age that they talk about, like getting involved and the importance, and maybe you have a little bit of time to get involved too. And so I think that felt like it felt right to start there in that moment. And then I think the jump to 2010 was, again, now that I'm realizing it, sort of all of this is actually kind of political, which I didn't realize till just now. But so 2010 were the Obama years. They briefly talk about the Obamacare. And just that kind of difference. And I think that that feeling in the air. So 2004, Bush, I think, kind of had a different feeling. And at least for me, person of privilege, like 2010 felt different. Oh, Obama, and like things are a little better. And then to push us out to 2017, which felt, I feel like we're still in that nightmare, but in different ways. But just, that there's even to talk about that there's that lack, I don't know, that sort of like that feeling of corny, the feeling of hope though in 2010, again, for some people, to then sort of feel like, I don't know, to feel like, I don't know, that we did end up in such a different place. So I think to me, it helps track the time, because I think it also says sort of where they are. And there's something too about coming back around, again, I think years under Bush versus years under Trump felt different, again, at least to me. But there was, again, something about that kind of like full circle where like we're back to something that doesn't feel good. But again, as this way to kind of like track time and how it changes.
Do you think that these moments of hope versus defeat are parallel to the state of Eleanor and Lena's relationship? Because in, say, Bush is like they're together and it fails after like a short period of time, and it's like, what happened? And then Obama, they're finally fucking and like absolutely like living together, and they were roommates, we love, but like, conflict and too, of course. But then Trump, it's just like they're together for a short period of time and then not. So that unintentional, or like was that kind of mirroring the feeling of the time?
That's good. That's a good question. I mean, I think it let me kind of like set the scene in a specific way, and really ground it like in a specific moment, like a moment of a feeling, but and like I said too, I think it's about this kind of like circuitous pattern, because I think I'll just hold up, I have it here, like the cover, right? Oh gosh, stupid blur. Okay, here we go. So like, but the idea, thank you, but the idea that kind of like that things loop. There's a lot of that in the book. The very heavy-handed elevator business between them. I think that was the idea. It's sort of like there's these kind of like matching bookends in the book. That's the idea.
Is that why the cover is loopy like that?
Yeah.
I think that was the last question that I had. Is there anything that you wish I asked you, or you feel like you didn't get to talk about, or anything that you just want to say to Sapph-Lit as a community?
Well, I guess first of all, I'm so happy to do this. I think in my regular life, like I write, and I have a part-time 9 to 5 and raising my kid and living life. And so it's so easy to kind of forget that I did this. And I think, and I think, but to kind of, I don't know, but to be able to be in conversation with you all, I think is just such a pleasure. And I think for me, I'm a huge fan of a lot of things. And so I don't know, to kind of like be able to talk with folks about like, oh, and what about this? Like, that is always a pleasure. I can't remember. I was with a book club, maybe like last year. And now I can't remember what the question was, but I remember it stumped me so bad. I was like, we just have to move on. But it's just something I'd never thought about before. And I love to be able to dig into the book and think about it in a big way. So I appreciate y'all so much.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And I'm glad that my questions were, ones that helped you dig in and helped you think.
Totally.
And I would love to stay connected and, see what this next book turns into. I adored your book, and I know the club did as well. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and say hi to your wife.
I will. Thanks, y'all. This was awesome.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.